When I stood up for a cause, a meaningful protest, it was just an ordinary Thursday evening when the notification pinged on my phone, vibrating against the worn wooden table, interrupting my half-hearted attempt at finishing my paper on climate change. A local activist group had posted an urgent call to action, a peaceful protest scheduled for Saturday afternoon in front of the town hall. They were rallying against the recent approval of a controversial pipeline project that would tear through our small town, bringing with it a slew of environmental risks and the potential for disaster. I hadn't been active in civic matters since college, but something about the urgency in their post struck a chord deep within me. Maybe it was the vision of oil spills in our pristine rivers or the thought of my niece playing in toxic playground soil someday. I decided then and there that I would attend, feeling both a thrill of resolve and a twinge of anxiety as I thought about standing shoulder to shoulder with strangers. Saturday came faster than I expected, and I found myself wearing a thrifted shirt that read, "Earth First." As I mingled with a sea of like-minded individuals. The atmosphere was electric, people of all ages braided together by a common goal. I felt nervous, yet strangely empowered, as we rallied behind a banner that said, "Protect our home." As noon approached, a sense of unity spread amongst us, punctuated by chants and the sound of drums that reverberated against the brick walls of Town Hall. But just as I began to feel comfortable, the air shifted. A trail of black SUVs rolled up, and I was struck by an uneasy feeling as the occupants emerged, men in expensive suits, flanked by a squad of security personnel. They strode confidently towards our crowd, and just like that, the atmosphere transformed from jubilant to tense. My heart raced as I realized they were the corporate lobbyists, the architects of the disaster we were protesting against. They didn't come to debate, they came to intimidate. That's when something snapped inside me. I had spent my life letting fear dictate my choices, but now, with everything at stake, I refused to cower. Biting back my fear, I stepped forward, my voice shaky yet cutting through the clamor. "We won't let you destroy our home," I shouted, my heart pounding in my chest. The crowd hushed for a split second, surprised at my audacity. Then, as if that single spark ignited a fuse, others began to chant with me, louder and louder until it felt like we were an unbreakable wave crashing against their wall of suits. I could see their expressions shift. They were taken aback, perhaps underestimating the resolve that could bubble up from ordinary people like us. But then, they smirked, as if they had seen it all before and had a plan ready. One of the men stepped forward, hands raised as if to calm us. "This is unnecessary," he said, his voice oozing condescension. "The project is already approved. It's out of your hands now." His arrogance infuriated me but fueled the fire in my belly. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew we couldn't back down. We had to push back harder. As we held our ground, a few others joined me at the forefront, emboldened by my words. "Stand with us," I called, and amidst the chants, a transformation happened. This protest morphed into something more than just a demonstration. This was a fight for our lives, our clean air, our kids' futures. Our passion turned visceral, and worry morphed into righteous anger. I spotted a spray bottle with bright pink paint near one of the drums, and in a sudden act of desperation, I snatched it up and splattered the pink goo across the pristine white sign of the corporate lobbyists. "This is what you're doing to our planet," I yelled, heart racing as the crowd erupted in cheers. My reckless act of vandalism shot adrenaline through our ranks, transforming the atmosphere again, transmuting dismay into action. Before I knew it, others were taking up paint, and suddenly the lobbyist's pristine sign turned into a canvas of solidarity and strength. The men in suits turned visibly agitated, their polished facade lost to the chaos of our shared defiance. One of them, the one who initially spoke, stepped closer, jaw clenched, ready to retaliate. But I held my ground, voice steady as I shouted, "You can't silence us. We will not stand by while you destroy our home." The firm resolve in my words seemed to make him hesitate. Maybe it was the tenacity in our voices, or perhaps he just realized he was outnumbered. It was at that tense moment that sirens wailed in the distance, echoing down the empty street. My breath caught in my throat as the protesters' chants reached a fever pitch. Police arrived, their faces a mixture of disbelief and confusion as they assessed the situation before them. More suited men surrounded by security officials glared daggers at us, and tensions flared. "This is a peaceful protest," I called out, championing the spirit and intent of our movement, hoping the officers would recognize our cause rather than criminalize our passion. The officers looked at the usually docile crowd of citizens, transformed into a passionate wave of fervor, and decided to hold their ground. They didn't approach us as aggressors but rather stood by, observing as we became a chaotic symphony of voices. The environment felt alive, charged with a mix of adrenaline and fear that rose with every chant, every splash of paint. As we engaged with the lobbyists, fueled by a desire to protect our land, I felt myself becoming part of something larger than I ever anticipated. The corporate men attempted to interject again, their arrogance now replaced with annoyance, but at that moment, our voices harmonized into a battle cry that drowned them out. Our shouts became a shield, protecting us from their disdain. When they realized their efforts were futile, they conferred in bitter tones, clearly exasperated by our resilience. And then, the unthinkable happened. With a wide grin, one of them pulled out his phone, likely to record us, to use against our movement, and I felt molten anger surge through my veins. I had been part of a society that had swallowed fear for far too long. Every day, the ambient sounds of indifference cloaked us in a fabric of apathy. But here and now, I felt liberated. I rushed to grab a handful of the vibrant paint and aimed it straight toward him, smearing the fire of our cause onto the cold, sterile corporate fabric. The crowd gasped, and in that split moment of chaos, I knew we had crossed a line, but in our hearts, we had already won. The moment crystallized forever in my memory, me, standing against a patriarchal wave of capitalism, my heart roaring not just for myself but for everyone who had been silenced for too long. All at once, a sense of euphoria rolled through me, a flicker of hope against the machines that try to grind us down. As the police officers remained passive, witnessing our tenacity, the tension broke, and the rally unfolded into a spectacular show of invaluable human spirit. We painted our fight directly onto the very fabric of their intentions, and it felt exhilarating. With our colors, we reclaimed our voices, our right to stand up against threats to our existence. Eventually, the lobbyists retreated, their plans thwarted not by violence, but by the signature colors of unity and empowerment we turned into art. It was no longer just protest, it had become a movement. I turned to the crowd with tears in my eyes, and for the first time, I saw faces of real change, faces that reflected the passionate heritage of this earth. We pacified the storm that day, marking our place in history with paint, pride, and promises to stand vigilantly for our cause, no matter the odds. When we walked away that day, filled with adrenaline, we knew this was just the beginning. That fight wasn't merely for approval or acceptance, it was a full-throated call against numbness, an embrace of what could be, and a commitment to protect every breath we took. It was in the heat of that moment that I realized, sometimes you need to stand up, even if it means getting a little paint on your hands. It started out as just a normal day in my small town, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and nothing ever seemed to happen. I was scrolling through my phone, lost in the haze of social media, when I came across a post that caught my attention. It was a local mom sharing how her house had burned down in a freak accident. She lost everything, her possessions, her family photos, even her children's toys. My heart ached for her, but as I read the comments, I noticed something strange. Instead of the typical sympathy, the comments quickly turned to bitterness and accusations. Many posters seemed to doubt the sincereness of her need, insinuating it was a ploy to get money or attention. I didn't understand it. This was a mother in distress. I had always thought our community was close-knit, but maybe I was wrong. A few days later, I attended a neighborhood meeting as I always did, expecting nothing out of the ordinary. But the atmosphere was tense. People were whispering about the incident, and soon enough someone mentioned the mom and her supposed lies. I felt a surge of anger rising inside me. This woman didn't deserve this treatment. I stood up, shouting about the importance of community and support. Surprisingly, faces softened around me as my words hung in the air, but it didn't change anything. Instead, I was met with a handful of nods and a full spectrum of uncomfortable glances. That night, I found myself unable to sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of the mom and her plight. I decided to take action. I created a GoFundMe page for her, detailing the tragedy and emphasizing that we, as a community, needed to rally behind her. I was sure that others would want to help, no one could be that callous, right? I shared the link on social media, and at first, the response was positive. Donations trickled in, and I felt a sense of hope. I even received messages of encouragement from friends who expressed their admiration. But soon, negativity crept in again. A few familiar names from the earlier comments started to lash out at my decision. They accused me of throwing money at a scam and called me naive for trusting a stranger. Each time I read one of those comments, a little piece of my enthusiasm crumbled. I prepared myself for the worst, but by the end of the week, I was stunned to see that we'd made a significant dent in the goal. I thought about how proud that mother would be, and how much this support might mean to her. But just as I was feeling optimistic, I received a message on the GoFundMe platform from an unknown user. The message was cryptic and alarming. "Stop while you can. You have no idea what you're dealing with." I felt a chill run down my spine. I dismissed it as just another troll, but the creeping paranoia followed me everywhere, tainting every donation notification with suspicion. The guilt of disrupting the community weighed heavily on me. I swear I could hear whispers every time I stepped outside. It felt as if the townspeople were all staring at me, scrutinizing my every move. I went to buy groceries one day, and as I strolled down the aisle, I overheard two people whispering about me and the GoFundMe. "I can't believe he's so gullible," one said. "Doesn't he know that's just a sad story?" I bolted out of the store, my heart racing. That evening, I decided to confront my fears and went to the mother's neighborhood. I knocked on her door, prepared to give her the cash I had managed to collect. I thought it might clear my conscience. When she opened the door, her eyes were red and puffy from crying. She looked surprised to see me, but she welcomed me in. I handed her the cash with a trembling hand, and in her eyes, I saw gratitude, fear, and something else, something I couldn't quite place. As we talked, she shared her story, how long she'd been struggling even before the fire, how it felt to be viewed with suspicion now that she needed help. I felt her earnestness seep into my bones. But even as I sat there, listening, the message echoed in my mind: "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Was it possible she was hiding something? I left her house feeling more confused than ever. Days passed, and the donations continued to roll in, but so did the hostility. People started to escalate their efforts to discredit the mother, even going as far as to post her old photos, claiming they were evidence of her supposed riches. All of it felt so alienating. Conflicted and overwhelmed, I found myself retreating deeper into my shell, avoiding my friends, my community, and even my family. Then came the night that would change everything. I was jolted awake by an urgent knock on my door. My heart thundered as I peered through the peephole. I saw the mom, drenched in rain, face pale and shivering. I opened the door, alarmed. "Please, I need to talk," she gasped, stepping inside. Quickly, she asked me to lock the door and told me about something sinister happening. There were people snooping around her house, and she suspected it was someone from our community. I felt an overwhelming urge to protect her. "What do you need me to do?" I asked, knowing I could potentially be putting myself at risk. She whispered, "Just come with me." Against my better judgment, I agreed, and she led me to a car parked a few blocks away, dimly lit by the streetlights. Nerves twisted in my stomach as I slipped into the passenger's seat, and she drove us into the dark outskirts of town. My mind raced, filled with questions. Eventually, we arrived at an abandoned warehouse at the edge of town. When she parked, she turned to me, her eyes wide with desperation. "I know this looks crazy, but if I'm right, we can expose the real truth," she whispered, glancing around nervously. The warehouse echoed around us, filled with shadows and lingering uncertainties. As she explained, a chilling story unfolded. She claimed a ring of local con artists had been targeting individuals in crisis. They had set her up to take the fall, and it was only a matter of time before they decided to come for me and anyone who had supported her. The stakes became painfully real as I realized how deep the deception ran. The dark humor of it all rang in my mind. Here I was trying to help, but now I was caught in someone else's game. The very suspicions that once haunted me began to swirl in the air between us. But in that moment, clarity struck me. Regardless of what was true or false, my community needed reminding that real support comes from honesty and compassion. We should never lose sight of that, no matter how dark things appeared. I took a deep breath and decided to face my fears. "We have to go back," I said, resolved. She hesitated but then nodded reluctantly. We returned to the neighborhood, and at the next town meeting, I stood up, trembling but determined. I shared everything I'd learned, exposing the lies and manipulation that had turned our community against this woman. My voice reverberated with concern, desperation, and hope. As I spoke, I witnessed the shift in the room. The scorn that had thickened the air began to dissipate, replaced by murmurs of shame and guilt. People seemed to recall a time when our town had been filled with kindness, when we had supported each other through our struggles instead of tearing each other down. Although fear was still evident, it felt like a collective awakening, a moment for healing. In the end, a wave of donations flooded in, not just the money but heartfelt gestures of kindness, clothes, furniture, and even emotional support. It was the moment I realized the power of community support. It didn't matter what had transpired. What truly mattered was our willingness to come together and uplift one another, regardless of our differences. As we wiped the slate clean, I looked at the mother, now filled with hope, and for the first time, I saw the promise of what we could become when we focused on the goodness we could achieve together. That day, I learned that while shadows may creep in, the light we share can be even stronger, if we let it. My awkward encounter with an old teacher, lessons learned. I hadn't thought about Mr. Foster in years, but there he was, standing in front of the dairy aisle at nearly midnight, looking as startled to see me as I was to see him. Mr. Foster was my high school history teacher, infamous for his strict demeanor and relentless discipline. He was that teacher, the one everyone quietly feared and respected, even if they didn't always like him. Back then, I hadn't exactly been his favorite, but I'd always admired his passion for teaching, even if he could be a bit intimidating. Now, though, years later, he looked different, older, worn down, his eyes hollowed by shadows, and a twitch of something I couldn't place. We exchanged the usual pleasantries, polite smiles and small talk, though his eyes never quite seemed to meet mine, always darting to something over my shoulder or down to his shoes. He asked about my life, work, if I'd kept in touch with any classmates, his tone almost too casual. I gave vague answers, trying to gauge his mood. Then he began mentioning names of classmates I hadn't thought about in years, names of students who had either clashed with him or whom he'd seemed especially hard on. It was odd, him asking about those specific people, and I felt a twinge of discomfort growing with each question. Then he asked if I'd ever felt like he'd treated us unfairly, like maybe he'd been too strict or harsh, and before I could really answer, he suddenly invited me to grab a coffee, claiming he had something to explain. Curiosity got the better of me, and I reluctantly agreed. We found a 24-hour diner nearby, and the whole way there, he seemed distracted, nervous, almost rehearsing something under his breath. Sitting across from him, I felt the atmosphere shift. He seemed less like the imposing teacher I'd once known and more like a man carrying a heavy weight. He began talking about how, as a teacher, he'd always seen potential in certain students, myself included, and how sometimes he worried he'd let that get to his head. "You were different," he said, his voice low, almost conspiratorial, as though he were confessing a secret he'd held for years. I nodded awkwardly, unsure of what to say. He went on, talking about how his methods may have been unconventional, but how they were necessary. Then his tone shifted, growing darker, more regretful. "There are things," he murmured, his gaze dropping to the table, "things I wish I could undo." He trailed off, his fingers drumming on the table, his face a mask of conflict. My heart started to race as he talked about ethical lines and gray areas, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't want to hear where this was going. I mumbled something about needing to leave soon, but he blocked my way, insisting I stay a little longer, as though he needed me to bear witness to whatever confession he was about to spill. Trapped, I tried to appear calm, nodding along as he spoke, all the while trying to think of a way to leave without setting him off. He leaned in, whispering, "Sometimes, you find yourself doing things you wouldn't normally do, all because you think it's right in the moment." His eyes had this haunted look, his voice wavering as if he were on the edge of a breakdown. I mumbled an excuse, something about needing the restroom, and slipped away as quickly as I could, my hands shaking as I dialed my friend's number, desperate to get out. When I came back, he was sitting there, calmer, eerily so, as if purging his soul had given him peace. He thanked me, his expression almost serene, and he walked out of the diner without another word. I sat there, stunned, trying to process everything, but a part of me didn't want to dwell on it. Later, I learned from an old classmate that Mr. Foster's name had been brought up in a few school scandals, allegations of misconduct that had been quietly swept under the rug, though nothing was ever proven. It was surreal to think that this man, who I'd once respected, had carried secrets so dark, and even more chilling to realize I'd been inches away from a confession that might have changed everything I thought I knew. The memory of that night haunts me still, the uneasy feeling that I barely escaped something truly sinister. I had always been the kind of person who thrived on routine. 9 to 5, the same desk, the same tasks, the same lunch break with my colleagues. It was predictably dull, a safe bubble I had wrapped around myself for years. I worked as a data analyst for a mid-sized tech company, and to be honest, I was content. At least, I thought I was. That was until the day I first received the email from my boss, inviting my team to a mandatory meeting about exciting changes on the horizon. The ominous tone sent shivers down my spine. As I sat in that packed conference room, I could feel the tension in the air, a thick cloud of uncertainty. The lights buzzed overhead as my boss paced before us like a caged animal, the glow of his laptop casting eerie shadows on the wall. Then he dropped the bombshell: our entire department was being restructured and half of us would be let go. In that moment, I felt the ground shift. My mind raced with possibilities and paranoia, but I kept quiet, trapping my fears behind a stoic facade. I didn't know what I would do without the security of my job, my routine. What was a life without my stable paycheck? The next few days were a blur of anxiety and doubt. I stayed glued to my laptop, endlessly scrolling job boards and sending out my resume. I felt like I was hunting ghosts. Every application felt like throwing a message in a bottle into an endless ocean, and I was drowning in despair. On the first day of the layoffs, I approached my boss. "Please, I need to know if I'm safe," I pleaded, my voice quivering. He just shook his head, looking more haunted than I felt. The relief of knowing that I was safe for another day was fleeting. The walk back to my desk felt longer than usual, every step weighted with dread. By Friday, the dreaded email arrived personally for me. I was part of the cuts. I felt like I had plunged into a dark abyss, and all I could do was float there, adrift and abandoned. Out of sheer desperation, I decided to book a short vacation. I thought a few days away from it all would clear my head, help me reevaluate what I wanted. I found a cheap flight and booked a cozy cabin by a lake, surrounded by thick pine trees. The night before I left, I couldn't sleep. I tried counting sheep, but all I could see were stacks of bills piling up and an uncertain future stretched out ahead of me. The trip itself was a haze. I spent the first day wandering the trails, letting nature's beauty wash over me. I felt the hand of dread pulling me back, reminding me at every turn that I was unemployed. That night, I sat on the porch, staring at the moonlight dancing on the water, when something inexplicable happened. I heard whispers, soft, melodic voices that seemed to beckon me. At first, I brushed it off as my imagination running wild, but the longer I listened, the more it felt real. I stood up, my feet moving of their own accord, leading me through the woods towards the source of the enchanting sound. I stumbled upon a gathering of people, dressed in flowing garments, illuminated by lanterns hanging from the trees. They were singing, dancing, and the energy felt electric. I wanted to turn back, to return to my cabin, but something compelled me to stay. I stepped closer, blending into the shadows, and watched. They didn't notice me, lost in their joy, but I felt an overwhelming wave of freedom and joy in their celebration. They reached out as if inviting me to join them, but an invisible barrier kept me at a distance. Just when I thought I'd turn and run back to my cabin, one of them caught my eye, an older woman with silver hair, her face like a map of stories untold. She smiled at me, and all of my fears, worries, and doubts suddenly faded. Suddenly, I heard her voice, soothing and melodic, cutting through the chaos of my mind. "Embrace change, dear one. Let go of what you cling to so tightly." Her words washed over me, and for a few seconds, the world around me faded to silence. I felt as though I were floating, caught between the earth and the sky, dangling in the balance of something greater. But just as quickly as it came, the moment was gone. I blinked, and the gathering had vanished, replaced by the stillness of the woods. I stumbled back to my cabin, shaken but oddly inspired. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel lost. I felt a spark of something new stirring within. Back home, I made a decision. No more safety net, I was going to embrace the uncertainty. I signed up for a coding boot camp, something I'd never considered before. I dedicated every waking hour to learning and growing. Slowly, I transformed that tangle of fear into a new passion, finding solace in the art of programming. A few months later, I had not only transformed myself but also rebuilt a new career. I landed a position at a startup focused on innovative tech solutions. They wanted someone who dared to think differently, and suddenly, I was that someone. I met people who were as excited about change as I was, who thrived in the unpredictability of life. They didn't just survive, they lived. In hindsight, I believe I was never meant to stay comfortable, constrained behind a desk, in a job that didn't ignite passion in my soul. I learned that change is a painful yet beautiful part of life, a shift that can carry you to places you never dreamed of going. And I often think back to that gathering in the woods, the beautiful voices that sang songs of freedom and transformation. They were right, you must let go of what holds you back to embrace what lies beyond. Now, I find myself in a world of endless possibilities, looking forward to every unfolding chapter. Through that night, I learned that change doesn't have to be something to fear, it can open doors to the dreams we never thought were possible. I stumbled upon my true calling on an unremarkable Tuesday night, but the details of that night have haunted me ever since. The fluorescent lights of the 24-hour diner buzzed overhead, casting a stark glow on the faces of the few patrons scattered around. My usual routine consisted of late-night study sessions, fueled by endless cups of coffee and the occasional slice of pie. I was a college student, drowning in textbooks, deadlines, and the pressure of adulthood looming over my head. It was supposed to be just another long night of cramming for an exam I was woefully unprepared for, but fate had other plans. When I walked in that night, everything felt off. The diner's usual chatter was strangely hushed, the clattering of cutlery seemed muted, and the waitress with the ever-cheerful smile wore an unsettling grimace. I took a seat at the counter, ordered my usual, and fished out my textbook. But as I opened it to the first page, I noticed something bizarre about the reflection in the glass panel behind the counter. It wasn't my tired face staring back at me, instead, it was a different version of me. The man in the reflection looked older, worn down by the years that seemed to accumulate on his shoulders. His eyes were hollow, as if he had seen too much of the world and couldn't quite bear it. I blinked, and he was gone, leaving me to question my own sanity. I shook my head, laughing nervously, telling myself it was just fatigue playing tricks on my mind. But something pulled at me, urging me to look back at that glass. When I did, I didn't see the tired man again. Instead, I saw glimpses of my future, fleeting images of strange places, of a vast darkness that cradled terrible wonders. My mind screamed that I needed to get out, but my body felt glued to the seat, captivated. As the waitress served my coffee, I noticed she was staring at me with a strange intensity, her eyes flicking back to the reflection as if sensing something swell within the air. "You okay, sweetie?" she asked, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. I nodded, unable to find the words to explain my discomfort, but her gaze held me in place. There was something almost knowing in her eyes, as if she could see the turmoil brewing within me. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a group of people huddled in a corner booth, their whispers barely audible. An urban legend surfaced in my mind, one about strangers who came to this diner in the dead of night, seeking something elusive that kept their souls tethered to the mortal realm. They called them seekers. Mere coincidence, I told myself, but why did it feel so real? The more I observed, the more I began to realize they were not ordinary people. They had an air of desperation about them, as if they were waiting for a message only they could understand. The longer I stared, the more I sensed a growing energy around them that pulsed like a heartbeat, and instinctively, I inched closer to eavesdrop. "It's coming tonight," one of them whispered, barely audible. "Tonight is the night we find it." My heart raced. What were they talking about? My curiosity overwhelmed my hesitation. I had to know more. I abandoned my studies and drifted closer, choosing the empty booth right beside theirs, trying to listen in without drawing attention. They were plotting something they believed would change their lives forever. Someone in the group mentioned the opening, and my breath caught in my throat as a surge of dread washed over me. It felt as if I was standing on the brink of an abyss, with knowledge that could drag me down into darkness if I weren't careful. But I was mesmerized, and suddenly, I felt a spark within me, an exhilaration I hadn't experienced in years. What if this was the moment that would define my life? The leader of the group, a tall, stoic woman with piercing blue eyes, stood up, her voice commanding. "We go now, or we miss it. It's our only shot." My heart pounded in my chest. It felt inexplicably clear that they invited me into this clandestine mission, a call to adventure I couldn't ignore. I slid from my booth and, without even thinking it through, fell in step behind them as they headed for the door. The chill of the night air hit me as I stepped outside, a strange contrast to the warmth of the diner. The seekers led me down a darkened alley lit only by flickering streetlights as their murmurs grew frantic. They discussed symbols, an ancient alignment of stars, and a doorway that would open if the conditions were right. I decided then that whatever it was, I was going to see it. When we reached the end of the alley, where the street faded into a narrow path framed by overgrown bushes, I could make out a portal standing ominously at the center of a clearing, an iridescent shimmer that bent light in uncanny ways. The air thickened. The seekers formed a tight circle around the portal, their voices rising in a chant that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. My pulse quickened, both terrified and exhilarated. I watched as one by one, they stepped forward, disappearing through the shimmering veil, their forms swallowed by a light that felt alive. The last one, the leader, turned to me, a fierce yet comforting gaze piercing through me. "You're meant to be here. Don't look back." My heart thudded in my chest. What was I hesitant for? I wanted to know what lay on the other side, to discover what was waiting for me. With a leap of faith fueled by fear and desire, I stepped forward into the brilliance, my body shuddering as the light enveloped me. It felt like being pulled apart and stitched back together in a matter of seconds. Suddenly, I was standing in a vast, cavernous space. Just as I took it all in, the world shifted violently, and I was confronted by visions that seized my mind. I saw people, thousands of them, their faces blurred, like flashes of a dream fading away. They were all watching me, their eyes alike, filled with yearning and desolation. I realized I wasn't just a participant, I had become a vessel for the souls trapped in this liminal space, trapped between worlds seeking resolution. Panic began to rise, but the realization dawned on me, this was my true calling. I was destined to help these lost souls find closure. The weight of their sorrow crashed down on me, threatening to consume my spirit, but something ignited within me, a desire, an obsession to find them peace. The cries echoed in my mind, their stories weaving into a tapestry of human experience, forgotten but never truly lost. Time blurred as I navigated this surreal expanse, bringing comfort to those in need, guiding them as they unburdened their fears and regrets. My own struggles shrank in comparison, and in this strange role, I finally found purpose. Then as suddenly as it began, it all fell silent. I stepped through the last portal, reclaiming my identity, my humanity, but not before the knowledge settled deep inside me. I had the power to explore, to heal, to perform what was long deemed impossible. The diner became a distant memory, yet it lingered in the fragments of dreams like a comforting embrace. I returned to my life, but the pull never ceased. I still visit that diner and those nights. Only now, I'm no longer alone. Those lost souls, those seekers, they follow me. Hidden in the shadows, they watch, waiting for their moments to be healed. As I sit with my coffee, serving the next person who walks in, I wonder how many others might answer the call if they could see beyond the veil. I wasn't just looking for my true calling, it had sought me, grasping my soul, pulling me into the depths of a world laden with suffering yet overflowing with purpose. And every visit is a new adventure, a new opportunity to change a life. The moment I discovered my true calling wasn't just a revelation, it became a haunting melody that lingers, a reminder that even in bitter darkness, that which we truly seek may be waiting just beyond our grasp. And every exit we take from this world can lead to another realm, one where we can finally find our way home. When my sibling stole my thunder, a family drama. When my sibling stole my thunder, a family drama. When my sibling stole my thunder, it wasn't just a momentary embarrassment, it became the catalyst for an unraveling that none of us anticipated. I should probably begin by saying that my older sister, Mia, has always been the star. From childhood beauty pageants to academic accolades, everything she touched seemed to turn to gold. I was the overlooked one, the shadow that trailed behind her. I would go through the motions, studied hard, but always in her shadow. Then came the year of my high school graduation. The evening of the ceremony was supposed to be mine, my moment to shine with my family beaming with pride. Anticipation built. My parents decorated the kitchen, balloons, and streamers announcing my achievement. But as the night drew closer, my parents received an unexpected call. Mia had scored a role in a major international film, she would be flying out to Los Angeles immediately. I remember the sheer joy in my mother's voice as she spoke with Mia over the phone and the way my father's eyes lit up in a way I had only seen during my own achievements. In the back seat of our family car, a knot began to grow in my stomach. The day of my graduation felt like a thin veil stretched taut around what should have been a joyous occasion. The ceremony happened as planned, but I'll never forget looking into the audience and seeing my parents enjoying the news of Mia's film instead of celebrating my special day. I walked across that stage, clutching my diploma tightly, but with every step, I felt like I was losing a part of myself. Sure enough, after the ceremony, we gathered at home, set up a small celebration just for me. My friends were excited, ready to cheer, but Mia's success loomed over us like an ominous cloud. On the kitchen counter lay my cake, decorated with congratulations. But it sat next to Mia's movie poster, hastily taped on the wall, its presence overpowering every variation of happy from my friends. I was slowly losing my voice in my own story. As the night wore on, I couldn't take it anymore. In a moment of frustration, I bolted upstairs and locked myself in my room. That night, I typed a fierce message to Mia, venting all my pent-up emotions. I pressed send, knowing it might ignite a storm. But I needed her to know the cost of her thunderstorm. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed violently with a response. "You're being ridiculous. This is my dream. Celebrate your own success instead of envying mine." I felt a whirlwind of anger and sadness mix in my gut, leaving me nauseous. I put my phone down and stared out of the window. The world outside felt so disconnected, even cold. That winter felt endless. Mia remained in LA, making waves while I sank back into the familiar role of the forgotten backup singer. Social media became my battleground. Every post, every tagged photo was a reminder of her glow overwhelming my struggle. I was slowly losing not just the battle, but the war for attention. Desperate, I turned to online forums. I poured my thoughts into anonymous posts, sharing pieces of my life under a pseudonym. I critiqued my family's dynamic, my sister's success that overshadowed mine, hoping for validation. Lurkers and commenters provided sympathy, some more than others, helping me feel understood. But in that anonymity, I found solace. One night, as I scrolled through /no sleep, I realized something. It did not matter what was happening out there, I could create my own worlds where I was no longer the shadow. The forum became my salvation, a place where my stories could take flight without the restriction of familial expectations. I poured my bottled emotions into horror tales grafted from my insecurities, and to my surprise, people loved them. They thrived on the darkness spun from the very shadow that was stifling me. In a matter of weeks, my posts gained a following, fairy tale horrors that spun widely in the imagination of strangers. I could get lost in my stories where my characters were powerful, driving their own narratives, defying their backgrounds of invisible confinement. Yet, amidst my success, there was an eerie emptiness that began to cling to my heart. Sure, I was celebrating some form of victory, but it was furtive beneath my growing resentment for Mia. My posts turned into a ritual. I craved the validation from people I would never meet. But then, one dark evening, fate took another turn. It started on Reddit when a user sent me a private message. It was Mia. She had stumbled upon my anonymous posts and was hurt. "You don't even know me anymore." It was simple, cut deep. After checking my uploads and realizing how I described our family dynamic, how I painted her image in hues of arrogance and ignorance, I turned cold. I couldn't find words. I felt exposed. However, I just sat there, frozen, staring at her message as if it were a gaping wound. Then the next day, news broke that Mia was in a scandal. Videos leaked revealing her backstage meltdowns and entitlement, coupled with her rising fame. Suddenly, the spotlight shifted. People began to question the authenticity of the image she had cultivated. My world began to swirl, each revelation making her less of a beacon and more of a fallen star. As she faced her public, my own path became illuminated, filled with the stories I created. I began to open up more about my life, my truths as a shadow, turning pain into art. I gained followers who resonated with my moral tales, feeding me a sense of belonging I had long sought. But was my newfound voice birthed from her demise? It left stains on my conscience. One evening, Mia called, and I picked up, trepidation plugged into my chest. I discovered a frail fragment of the sister I once knew, a fractured soul clinging to her past identity while grappling with her present. Our conversation unfolded slowly, layered with insecurities, apologies for the hurt we each caused. It was a confession, the recognition of our battle as siblings overshadowed by each other's quest for acknowledgement. As we spoke, I realized the shared burden. We both felt like puppets in the family arena, one volatile thread feeding off the other's plight. We broke through that dark night, trading our perception of each other. There is nuance behind success in storms. We might have shared shade but didn't have to be enemies. Weeks passed, and amid all the throes of her scandal, the dynamics slowly shifted. I took steps toward my achievements unencumbered, no longer a shadow but a bystander cheering for the sky where Mia soared. Together, we moved through our narrative, co-authors rather than competitors. Isn't it striking how sibling rivalry can feel like blood on the walls of a haunted house? We each created our stories entwined yet distinct, experiencing thunder not as theft but a shared awakening. It's hard to find peace, but sometimes harmony is merely accepting each other's voices alongside our own, even as we wade through the chaos of family and the horrors of an unseen war. Each of us forever balancing the fine line of shared thunder, transcending the shadows to claim the light you embody, teasing the echoes of a raging storm to harmonize melodies instead of drown beneath them. An unexpected reunion with my first love, the drama. An unexpected reunion with my first love, the drama. It started as a regular weekend, or at least I thought it would be, with plans to attend a friend's engagement party at a cozy little venue on the outskirts of town. I was excited, dressed in my best, and ready to celebrate. Little did I know, I was about to come face to face with someone I'd once thought I'd spend my entire life with, my first love. I hadn't seen him in years, and honestly, I thought I'd buried that chapter of my life deep enough that it would never resurface. But there he was, standing across the room, looking as if time had barely touched him. He was talking to someone, laughing in that way I'd remembered all too well, the way that used to make my heart race. For a second, I felt like a teenager again, overcome with a wave of nostalgia, mixed with that pit in your stomach kind of feeling that I hadn't experienced in ages. I wanted to look away, to pretend I hadn't seen him, but somehow, I couldn't. Then, as if sensing my gaze, he looked right at me. Our eyes met, and in that split second, the years seemed to melt away, replaced by the raw memory of everything we'd been, and all we hadn't been. He made his way over, and with each step, my heart raced faster. I could barely manage to steady myself as he smiled and said, "Hey, it's been a while, hasn't it?" My mind raced through everything I wanted to say, the questions I'd had for years, the things left unsaid. But all that came out was, "Yeah, it really has." We fell into easy conversation, which surprised me. Somehow, it felt like no time had passed at all. We reminisced about our shared memories, the ridiculous things we'd done as young, foolish kids in love, and there was a part of me that wondered if maybe, just maybe, we could start over. That's when the door opened, and she walked in. She was beautiful, elegant, and confident, the kind of woman who radiated poise and style, the type I'd always felt I could never be. She walked right over to us and slid her arm around his waist, giving me a quick, appraising look before flashing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hi, I'm Sarah," she said, extending a hand. He looked a little uneasy, as if he hadn't expected her to show up just yet, but he quickly masked it with a smile of his own. "This is my fiancé," he said, his words stabbing through me like a knife. Fiancé. The word hung heavy in the air, filling the space between us with a thick, awkward tension. I forced a smile, trying to hide the hurt that was clawing its way to the surface. He had moved on, and clearly, he was serious about this woman, this stranger who now stood beside him, claiming the future we'd once dreamed of sharing. It was a strange feeling, to see the life I'd imagined with him in someone else's hands. I could tell Sarah was trying to gauge me, her eyes flicking back and forth between us, perhaps sensing the history that was silently screaming between us. She didn't let go of him, holding on to him a little tighter, as if staking her claim. I excused myself, pretending I needed to grab a drink, hoping to escape before my emotions betrayed me. As I stood at the bar, clutching my drink, trying to steady my breathing, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was him again, and the look in his eyes told me he'd followed me to talk. "I didn't know you'd be here tonight," he said softly, as if that would somehow soften the blow of seeing him with someone else. "Neither did I replied, not meeting his gaze. "But I guess life has a funny way of throwing curveballs," he sighed, and for a moment, he looked like he wanted to say something more, something deeper, but instead, he just apologized. He apologized for everything, how things ended, how he handled it, how he moved on too fast. He admitted that he'd thought about reaching out 1,000 times but never did, fearing it would stir up old wounds. The sincerity in his voice made it worse because part of me wanted to forgive him, to let it go, but the other part of me was still hurt, still carrying the weight of what we'd lost. Before I could respond, Sarah appeared beside us, her gaze sharp, clearly not pleased with how close we were standing. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, her voice polite but laced with an undercurrent of suspicion. I nodded quickly, eager to escape the tension. I could see that she was uncomfortable, and honestly, so was I. I didn't want to be the reason for any strain between them, didn't want to be a shadow from the past creeping into his new life. I excused myself again, but this time, he didn't follow. As the evening went on, I found myself constantly aware of them, stealing glances when I thought no one was watching. And each time I saw them together, laughing, whispering, holding hands, a part of me ached with the realization that he had moved on, and I hadn't. I'd been holding on to a ghost, a memory, while he'd built a future with someone else. Toward the end of the night, just as I was about to leave, he came up to me one last time. "I just wanted to say goodbye," he said, his tone soft, almost regretful. I managed a small smile, knowing this was truly the end. "Goodbye," I replied, feeling a strange mix of closure and lingering sadness. As I walked away, I couldn't help but wonder what could have been, but I also realized that maybe this was the universe's way of finally setting me free. I left the party with a heavy heart, but also with a sense of clarity. It hurt, yes, but I knew it was time to let go, to move on, and to find happiness in the life I had, rather than the life I'd once dreamed of with him. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer had to define me. I never considered myself a bad communicator, but when my girlfriend Lily ended things, reality hit me harder than a punch to the gut. I thought we had it all figured out, but clearly, something wasn't clicking. It wasn't until she packed her things and walked out the door, leaving me with the stinging words "you just never listen" echoing in my mind, that I realized I had to make an effort to change. I stumbled through the initial days of our breakup, drowning my sorrows in binge-watching shows and lofty delusions of winning her back with grand gestures. But as the shock wore off, a twisted curiosity about my failures crept in. I started obsessively retracing our conversations. Texts, late-night talks, all those moments when I thought I was there for her but apparently wasn't. I noticed a pattern. When she opened up, I responded with platitudes or worse, tried to offer solutions instead of listening. It was as if I heard her but didn't really hear her. One night, deep in my rabbit hole of self-reflection, I came across a forum post on an obscure website, titled "How I Learned to Communicate with the Dead." At first, I dismissed it as another incredible hoax, but my morbid curiosity got the better of me. It described a mystical experience involving a one-of-a-kind seance led by a woman named Agnes, who claimed to connect you not just with the deceased but deeper aspects of yourself. It quickly became my obsession. After hours of searching, I found her old shop tucked away in an alley at the edge of town. I hesitated, an uneasy feeling washing over me as I approached the creaky door. Inside, the dim light flickered ominously, and the air was heavy with incense. Agnes was an elderly woman, with wild white hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. "You're here for answers," she stated, almost like a revelation. I nodded, feeling foolish yet strangely compelled by her presence. As she prepared for the séance, she filled the room with an eerie calmness that lulled my anxiety. The candles flickered more with each moment, and the air thickened, almost buzzing with anticipation. "To communicate better, we need to quiet the noise within you." She instructed me to focus on my breath, to strip away the clutter of my thoughts, emotions, and insecurities. I closed my eyes and tried. It was a strange mix of calming and chaos, the constant chatter of self-doubt warring against her voice like an undefeated champion. When I opened my eyes again, I saw the candles flickering wildly, shadows dancing wildly across the walls. Agnes held my gaze, and that's when I felt it, a rush of memories, voices, and emotions flooding my mind. The spirit, she said, represented all those moments I had swept aside. It wasn't a ghost in the traditional sense, but a manifestation of my regrets. Around midnight, I felt as if I had transcended time, hanging on to every single word whispered from the echoes of past arguments with Lily, her voice ringing crystal clear in my mind. I felt her pain, her frustration at my indifference. I was reliving every moment I had neglected her feelings. The weight of it all hit me like a freight train, and I found myself pleading out loud, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you. Why didn't I see it?" But Agnes simply smiled knowingly, her gaze unwavering. "You can't change the past, but you can learn from it. Open your heart and mind to others." When the séance ended, and I stumbled out of the shop, the world seemed different. Colors were brighter, sounds were sharper. In that disorienting moment, I realized communication wasn't about the words themselves, it was about truly listening and understanding the emotions behind them. The next day, I sent Lily a text, a simple message asking if she would be open to talking. Surprisingly, she replied almost immediately. We agreed to meet at our favorite cafe, a place filled with bittersweet memories. My palms were sweaty as I sat down with my coffee, the aroma filling my senses. When she arrived, we exchanged tentative smiles. I had rehearsed what to say 1,000 times over, but all that planning felt unnecessary now that I was faced with her. I started by apologizing, not just for the breakup, but for the times I hadn't listened. To my amazement, her eyes softened, she shared her perspective on everything, and I listened. It felt as if I was hearing her for the first time. As our conversation flowed, I realized that she was still the same, but I had changed. I asked her to tell me about her day, her feelings, even her dreams, all the things I had pushed aside in the past. For the first time, I focused solely on her words, absorbing the emotions behind them. It was awkward and difficult at times because trusting each other again felt like a fragile dance. But as we talked, I began to understand the nuances of communication, the subtleties of patience and empathy. When our conversation came to an end, I was left in awe of the progress we made in just one meeting. We didn't rush back into a relationship, but we established a foundation of understanding that hadn't been there before. I realized truly listening was just as important as talking. That night, I reflected on the experience, how a seance had shown me the ghosts of my actions. It wasn't the supernatural that had changed me, it was the realization of my shortcomings. Days turned into weeks, and Lily and I started to rebuild our connection slowly. There were still bumps along the way, misunderstandings that popped up from time to time, but now, instead of deflecting or dodging them, we faced each issue head-on. Each conversation built more trust, we laughed together, cried together, and, most importantly, we learned how to communicate. I embraced that vulnerability, and it became natural to probe deeper, ask more questions, and show genuine interest in her feelings. I learned not to see silence as an enemy to fill with chatter, but as an opportunity to reflect or understand. Months passed, and one evening on a back porch, while watching the sun dip below the horizon, I turned to Lily and said, "I'm grateful for everything, even the tough times. They made me better." She smiled at me softly, those eyes sparkling with a knowing light as she replied, "I think we both learned a lot, didn't we?" And in that moment, I understood that communication was an ongoing journey, not a destination. It was about empathy, listening, and really valuing what each partner brought to the relationship. I never did see Agnes again, but her words lingered, a soft reminder of how I learned to communicate better in my relationships without the need for spirits or seance. There's a ghost of sorts in every relationship, it's just up to us to confront them. I've always had a complicated relationship with dancing. As a kid, I loved to move to music, spinning and twirling in my living room until my mom's laughter echoed off the walls, telling me I was a natural. Those carefree days ended abruptly when I entered middle school. The moment I walked into a crowded gym filled with the whirls of bodies and heavy bass lines, I felt something shift inside me, a bone-deep anxiety. I worried about every clumsy step and awkward movement. Watching my classmates glide effortlessly across the floor left me rooted in fear, paralyzed by embarrassment. By the time high school rolled around, I had successfully turned myself into the wallflower. At parties, I would hang back, sipping soda, pretending to be engrossed in text messages while my friends danced freely, unaware of the heavy weight I carried. One night, however, everything changed. It was my senior prom. The gym was transformed into a shimmering paradise, balloons floated ceiling high, and twinkling lights cast a golden glow on all the laughter and excitement. I could feel the music vibrating through the soles of my shoes, calling me, challenging me to join the celebration. But the fear crept in, thick and suffocating. I stood by the punch bowl, my heart racing, watching my friends dance with abandon. That's when I noticed her, Jess, my childhood best friend. Jess, who had always been my supporter, dancing alongside me through the bravest and silliest moments, was in the center of the floor, surrounded by a crowd. She was glowing, radiant, completely absorbing the joy around her. All of a sudden, the music shifted into a slow song. As she turned to look for me, I could see in her eyes that she wanted to dance. Her invitation was clear. But then I froze, gripped by familiar panic, caught in a moment I felt helpless to escape. I'm not sure how long I stood there, battling my own internal demons, but out of the corner of my eye, I noticed an old, dusty luminescent disco ball spinning above us. It emitted soft, scattered reflections across the room, little points of light dancing around the dim corners like tiny spirits, leaving wake trails of shimmering hope. I realized then what I had to do. Without a second thought, I dropped my soda and pushed through the crowd toward Jess. My heart raced as each step brought me closer to her. I focused on the disco ball, the points of light growing larger as I moved, and my fear began to dissolve with every flicker I passed. When I reached her, all I could see was her smile. I didn't think, I just moved, sweeping her into a clumsy spin. Laughter erupted around us as we started to dance, and for the first time in years, I felt alive. I wasn't thinking about how I looked, all that mattered was the rhythm that pulsed through me. I began to twirl, creating waves of laughter with the spins, momentarily turning my embarrassment into joy. The lights bounced off our bodies, and I could feel the disco ball above amplifying my courage. Dancing like nobody was watching was the most liberating feeling I had ever experienced. Time seemed to slip away as we moved to the beat, losing ourselves in that magical moment. But then, something strange happened. The lights flickered violently, and the music began to warp, taking on an eerie distortion. The laughter morphed into a haunting sound, resonating through the gym like a signal from another realm. Jess's smile faded, and her expression turned solemn, almost fearful. Panic seared through me again, but I pushed it down, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes upon us as I grasped her hand tighter. "Come on, let's dance," I urged her, fighting against the sinking feeling in my stomach. But Jess shook her head, her gaze darting toward the doors, which had suddenly slammed shut as if sealed by some unseen force. "We need to leave," she whispered, pulling at me. But the music became deafening, a cacophony of dissonance that overwhelmed our senses. The temperature dropped, and I could see a fog creeping in from the edges of the room, tendrils wrapping around our legs like ghostly fingers. It dawned on me that the jubilant atmosphere had shifted into something sinister. I had never wanted to be part of a group more in my life, and yet here we were, trapped in a swirling vortex of confusion. Everywhere I looked, faces were twisted in fear, eyes wide and desperate for escape. The crowd that had once danced with joy became enraptured by the shadows creeping into the light. "We need to go," I shouted amidst the chaos, but my words barely cut through the thickening haze. Jess pulled me toward the exit, but as we reached for the door, an unseen force slammed us back. We stumbled, landing at the center of the room. The laughter turned into a chilling chorus, an echo of twisted mockery that sent chills down my spine. And as I looked around, the crowd began to move again, but this time, they weren't themselves. Their movements were jerky and unnatural, like marionettes controlled by an invisible puppet master. I felt sick, trapped in a nightmare where the fun had turned foul. Then came the whispers, "Join us." The voices beckoned from the shadows that loomed around the now familiar faces. "Dance with us." Panic surged through me. Jess gripped my arm, eyes wide, and backing away as the darkness pulled closer. Instinct kicked in, and I tore away from her grasp, stepping forward, overwhelmed with a stupid notion to prove to myself that I could dance, that I could handle this strange new reality. I began to sway and wiggle, fueled by adrenaline more than anything else, and somehow it seemed to draw the eyes of the twisted figures around me. Slowly, I felt the power of the rhythm wrap around my limbs, a dark, unnatural beat, and I used it. If this was an eerie reflection of those moments spent dancing like no one was watching, I could manipulate it, channel it into something less sinister. I danced with fervor, and the response was immediate. The shadows recoiled, intrigued, and the prying whispers slightly faded. The people surrounding me shifted, and before I knew it, I was spinning like a hurricane amidst their chaos. I focused on the echoes of joy that came before the shadows, forcing my heart to rise above fear, and suddenly it worked. One by one, the faces of my friends joined mine, our movements synchronized, a beacon of light in the dark. We danced and danced, until the fog began to recede, the dissonance warping into that sweet melodic song that had led me to Jess mere moments ago. The gym unfurled into the shimmering paradise it had been earlier, our laughter filling the air as we reclaimed the space. As the last tendrils of darkness faded away, we stood, breathless and restored, the disco ball reflecting our triumph back at us in 1,000 tiny points of light. I looked around at my friends, the palpable relief washing over our collective hearts, and Jess literally shouted, "We did it. We danced when it mattered." And from that moment forward, I realized something crucial. Dancing, truly dancing like no one was watching, was more than just a joyful expression of movement. It became a shield against the shadows that lurk around us, waiting for us to abandon our joy. Ever since that night, I learned that I could dance again without fear, that I could face the darkness head-on and remember to always invite the light back in. Dancing isn't just stepping in time with a beat, it's a fierce declaration that we are alive, together. So, if you ever find yourself feeling fear gripping your heart, remember the lights, remember the dance. Because once you truly learn to dance like no one is watching, you'll never have to be afraid again. A few months ago, my life took an unexpected turn that I still can't shake off. It started as a typical Saturday. My 7-year-old son, Jimmy, was playing in the backyard while I was inside trying to organize some clutter, those mundane adult responsibilities no one tells you about when you first become a parent. I heard giggles and the sound of tiny feet thumping against the wooden deck. It was a beautiful day, and I briefly forgot about the mess to enjoy the serene moment of his laughter echoing through the open windows. Then, in mid-laughter, it suddenly stopped. I felt a chill creep down my spine. Parents know that silence, it's a telltale sign something is amiss. So, I rushed outside, the clutter forgotten, scanning the yard for my son. As I stepped onto the grass, I spotted him crouching near the big oak tree, peering intently at something. "What are you doing, buddy?" I called out, hoping to see him up to something harmless like collecting acorns or searching for critters. When he looked up at me, his wide, innocent eyes held a strange glimmer that made my stomach twist. "I found a treasure, Dad. Come see." He beckoned me closer, and I hesitated for a moment before making my way over. There, nestled in the roots of the tree, lay an old, rusty box. It was small, maybe a foot long and half that wide, covered in dirt and leaves that had accumulated over who knows how many years. "That's incredible, Jimmy. Where do you think it came from?" I knelt beside him, the very air thickening with anticipation. He shrugged, still not releasing his gaze from the box. "Can we open it?" For a moment, I considered saying no, the fear of what might reside inside swirling in my mind, but the curiosity was too potent. "Let's see what's inside." We pried the lid open together, the rusty hinges moaned like they were waking after a long slumber. Inside, there were old photographs, their edges frayed and yellowing with age. Most were faded images of women and men, faces I didn't recognize. But one photo caught my eye. It was of a little girl, no older than Jimmy. She stared back at me, her eyes deep blue with a haunting aura that sent shivers through me. "Who is she?" I asked, glancing at Jimmy. He simply shrugged again, completely unfazed. But as I inspected the box further, I noticed a crumpled, yellowed piece of paper beneath the photographs. I pulled it out, smoothed it across my knee, and read it aloud. "If you dare unearth the past, remember, memories can bind and haunt." The words settled in an unsettling silence, and I felt a sudden urge to close the box. "Let's put this back, it's just junk." But Jimmy shook his head, the glimmer in his eyes still shining bright, almost mischievously. "But it's ours now." He grabbed the old box and dashed towards the house. Against my better judgment, I followed him inside, a feeling of dread growing in the pit of my stomach. That night, as we sat around the dinner table, the box was the only thing on my mind. I glanced over at my son, who was excited and playing with the photographs, spreading them across the table. But slowly, I noticed something odd. Jimmy's laughter had changed, it felt deeper, almost foreign. When I asked him to help clear the table, he looked up, and for the briefest moment, I didn't see my son. His gaze was intense, and his mouth curled into a smirk I couldn't recognize. "Not yet, Dad. I'm busy." Goosebumps shot up my arms, and I brushed it off, convincing myself it was just my imagination. After everything was cleared, he ran upstairs, leaving the box open on the dining table. I told myself I had to put it away, but when I glanced at it, that little girl's face seemed to almost call to me. Against my judgment, I picked up a photograph. Gazing into its haunting blue eyes, I felt a wave of emotions, a flood of laughter, and then pain. I felt memories that weren't mine rushing through me. They belonged to her. I tore my eyes away and slammed the photograph back into the box, shaken. At that moment, Jimmy came back downstairs with a small toy in hand. "Can I show you something?" he asked eagerly, that strange glimmer creeping back into his eyes. I nodded hesitantly, following him into the living room where he stood in front of the fireplace. He held up the toy, but it looked strange, like a mix between a doll and a puppet, its mouth moving slightly when he spoke. "I can make it talk." He squeezed the toy's belly, and, to my horror, a voice wafted out, not just any voice, but that of the little girl from the photograph. "Look at me. I'm your friend." Terror clawed at my insides as I stumbled back, my gaze darting to Jimmy, who was laughing hysterically as if he hadn't just unleashed something sinister upon our home. "Where did you get that?" I croaked, panic surging. "From the box," he giggled, delighting in my concern. I grabbed the box, heart racing, and snatched the puppet from his hands, but it was glued to him, refusing to let go. That's when the strange laughter transformed into something dark and taunting. "Let's play, Jimmy. Let's never stop playing." I felt nausea wash over me, and as I wrestled with the puppet, I was struck with a memory that was not mine, grotesque images swirling through my mind, a child weeping, lost, forgotten. I finally managed to yank the puppet free, and Jimmy collapsed on the floor, giggles turning into sobs. "Why did you take her away?" I didn't understand, but the chair creaked, and I looked back at the box, that old photograph lying vulnerable amidst the chaos, that girl's blue eyes drilling into my soul. "No more," I shouted, tossing the puppet into the box, slamming the lid shut as if sealing whatever horror was unleashed. I expected some kind of release, but the air felt heavier. The atmosphere thickened with a mournful sigh. I grabbed Jimmy and held him close, but behind my back, soft whispers filled the room. "You can't keep us apart." The little girl's words dripped like honey, weaving through the air. We didn't sleep that night. I held Jimmy as he trembled, whispering that everything would be okay, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd unleashed something terrifying. As dawn broke, we took the box to the backyard, the little girl's image etched into my mind. I buried it deep beneath the roots of that oak tree, praying to whatever power might listen that it would stay buried and forgotten. Each year on that date, something is different. Jimmy would laugh more than normal, almost too much, as if harboring humor from the voices buried beneath the earth. But some days, he stares out the window as if waiting for something, or someone. I sometimes catch glimpses of that little girl and his smile, and every time I want to scream and pull him close. But every night, I remind him, "You are my son. Never forget that." And somewhere, in the back of my mind, I understand that this lesson isn't just for him but for me. Memories can bind, haunt, and even steal those we love because sometimes the past refuses to stay buried. Sometimes, just sometimes, the fears we bury will come back and demand to be played with again. I used to think that kindness was just an afterthought, something people did when it was convenient or easy. I never gave it much weight until a bitterly cold winter evening that turned everything on its head. It was a night like any other. I was trudging home after a long day at work and the icy wind cut through my thin jacket like knives. My mind was consumed by my own problems, swirling thoughts about deadlines and bills. I barely noticed the scruffy figure shivering on the corner of the street until I nearly stepped on them. He was an older man, his beard matted and unkempt, with a look of desperation that shocked me back to reality. He was wrapped in layers of tattered coats, holding a flimsy cardboard sign that read, "Anything helps. God bless." The memory of his eyes, hollow and pleading, still haunts me. I felt a pang of guilt, an unsettling realization of my own privilege in that moment, but I quickly dismissed it. My mind raced. What do I have to spare? $1. I didn't want to dig into my pockets for loose change. It felt pointless and wouldn't change his life, would it? So instead, I walked past him, the image of his face imprinted on my mind as I told myself I should keep my head down and hurry home. But then something made me pause. I glanced back, and despite the cold that seemed to seep into my bones, I felt a small spark of compassion. I stopped, turned around, and hesitantly walked back to him. I had just a few bucks in my wallet, and I knew I could spare it. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a $5 bill. My heart was racing in that moment as I handed it to him. I'll never forget the look he gave me. It was a mixture of surprise and gratitude that shifted something deep inside me. "Thank you, kind soul," he said, his voice cracking like old wood. I smiled, feeling warm despite the chill in the air, and walked away thinking I had done my good deed for the day. But that was just the beginning. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the memory of that old man. I started looking for ways to incorporate small acts of kindness into my life. I bought coffee for the barista when I got my morning brew, opened doors for strangers, even left a few extra coins in tip jars. The response was always the same, a moment of surprise followed by a smile, almost like I was igniting a spark of joy. What shocked me most was how these small gestures transformed my own outlook on life. I felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. But then came the night that changed everything. It was the weekend before Christmas, and out of habit, I found myself on the same street where I had met the old man. I was lost in my thoughts of holiday plans when I noticed a commotion, and my heart sank as I approached. The old man was lying on the ground, unconscious, surrounded by a group of people. My stomach dropped. I rushed to the scene and knelt beside him. Someone was calling 911, but I could tell we were losing precious minutes. I touched his shoulder gently, and he stirred but didn't wake up. Then it hit me, if I had given even just a little bit more, would it have changed anything? My heart raced as I felt helpless, the weight of my own guilt crashing in like a tidal wave. I frantically began to perform CPR, my hands shaking, but I knew I had to try. I could hear the sirens approaching, but time felt like it was standing still. Just as I was losing hope, he gasped for air and opened his eyes, looking right at me. An emotion flooded his gaze, recognition. You helped me," he murmured weakly. Relief washed over me, but before I could respond, the paramedics arrived and whisked him away. I stood there, torn between fear and resolve. The holiday lights twinkled against the darkening night, but all I could feel was dread. I spent the next few days worrying about him. I kept replaying our brief encounters in my mind, as if I might find some answer for why his life had intersected with mine, even for such a fleeting moment. On Christmas Day, I decided I needed to know how he was doing. I returned to the street and found a small crowd of people gathered around a makeshift shelter. My heart raced as I approached, and to my surprise, I found him there, sitting on a bench, looking surprisingly better. His cheeks were still hollow, but there was a light in his eyes. I approached cautiously, half expecting him to not remember me. "You saved my life," he said simply, locking eyes with me. I was taken aback. But he cut me off. "No, listen. You showed kindness when I had nothing. You saved me not only from the cold that night but from something even darker inside me." I had lost hope. My throat tightened as he spoke, and I realized in that moment that kindness isn't quantifiable. It ripples through the universe, changes lives in ways we cannot fathom. We talked for hours, sharing stories of our lives, connecting in a way I had never anticipated. I learned his name was Henry, and he had once been a successful artist before life twisted into the mess that brought him to that corner. Together, we shared laughter and tears, and I felt an unbreakable bond form between us. The aftermath of that day transformed my worldview. From then on, I committed myself daily to kindness, and it became my life's mission. I didn't just throw loose change anymore. I volunteered, I befriended people who felt invisible, and I even helped Henry find art supplies so he could express himself again. What started as a small gesture grew into a life-altering ripple that sparked kindness in others. Eventually, Henry's light returned, and he started painting again. To this day, he creates art that not only portrays his struggles but inspires countless others to find their own light. And that's the incredible part. I learned that kindness, no matter how small, has a profound impact. It can turn despair into hope, darkness into light. Henry and I remain friends, and every Christmas, we share a meal to commemorate that night, an annual reminder that even the smallest gesture can change the course of someone's life forever. I'll never forget how that winter night taught me the true power of kindness, and now I dedicate my life to spreading that warmth as often as I can. Because, in the end, kindness isn't just about making a difference, it's about realizing that we are all connected by the fragile thread of empathy. So the next time you feel that urge to look away or keep your head down, remember that a small gesture can change everything. It can save a life. It can remind someone that they are not alone. And maybe, just maybe, it can spark a light in someone else that lasts a lifetime. I never thought that helping a child learn something new could lead down such a dark path. It started on an ordinary Tuesday evening. I was babysitting my neighbor's 10-year-old daughter, Lily, a bright and imaginative girl with an infectious curiosity. While her parents were out at a charity event, we decided to spend the evening doing something fun. I set up a little makeshift science lab in the kitchen, stocked with baking soda, vinegar, and a handful of colorful food dyes. We giggled through a few experiments, clouds of fizz and color erupting like tiny volcanoes. Lily was enthralled, her big brown eyes sparkling with excitement, and we ended up making a mess that would take her parents hours to clean up. As the hour got late, she pulled an old dusty book off the shelf titled Beginner's Guide to the Supernatural. I raised an eyebrow, half expecting it to be one of those cheesy kids' books about ghosts or magic. When she asked me to read it, I figured, why not? Crazy tales of spirits, haunted places, and bizarre rituals filled the pages. Somehow, the atmospheric descriptions made the stories linger in the air as if they were alive. One story, in particular, caught our attention, the tale of a game called The Hidden. It involved conjuring an entity through a series of simple questions and a daring invitation to join us here in the real world. Lily was mesmerized. I brushed it off at first, teasing her about believing in imaginary creatures, but then she powered through, her enthusiasm infectious. My initial hesitations melted away, and before I knew it, I found myself agreeing. We needed a quiet space, a bathroom, away from the prying eyes of the night. Armed with a flashlight and shaky hands, the two of us squeezed into the cramped space, the door locked behind us. I felt like a grown-up fool, indulging a child in fantasies, but her energy ignited a flickering spark of daring in me. I recalled a few spooky campfire stories from my own childhood and began to chant the rhyme that was strangely laid out in that tattered book. If you hear me, come to play, hide with us for a day. The air thickened, and a chill wind blew through the room, sending goosebumps racing down my arms. I laughed nervously, glancing at Lily, who was just as tense but brimming with excitement. We repeated the phrases, laughing at our nerves until the laughter faded. Then, a banging noise echoed from outside, rattling the window and startling us, shattering our fragile bubble of bravery. "Did you hear that?" Lily whispered, her voice quivering in the otherwise quiet darkness. I nodded, but held my breath instead of responding. As if the universe was mocking us, the bathroom lights flickered, illuminating faces of fear reflected in the tiny mirror. I could feel it too, something ancient, something restless was coming alive around us, clawing at the edges of the shadowed room. I held my breath as I lifted the flashlight, focusing its beam on the wall, half expecting a ghost to pop out and laugh at our expense. Just when I was about to make some silly joke to ease the tension, I heard the softest of whispers. It was barely audible, like a gentle brush of wind. "Help me." My heart slammed in my chest, a primal fear taking hold of my rational mind. The voice was distorted, sounding like an anguished child, a sound that cut through the veil of excitement that had cloaked me just moments ago. I glanced at Lily, her face pale and eyes wide as she clutched my sleeve, her grip tightening as if sensing my own dread. "Did you hear that?" she gasped, trembling. Committing to the bit felt like risking more than just our dignity now. I forced a shaky smile, trying to downplay the rising horror. "It's just the wind," I lied, but my voice trembled, bordering on panic. Without another word, we shared a look that determined our fate. We needed to escape this absurdity. In my effort to lead us out, I turned sharply, and the flashlight flickered. The beam illuminated the bathroom door, but the light flickered again, and my blood ran cold when I realized that Lily was no longer beside me. I spun around, frantic, sweeping the flashlight frantically. "Lily!" I called, freaking out inside, desperate. Then, the unmistakable creaking of the bathroom door echoed behind me. In the dim light, it swung open slowly, drawing a shadowy outline of what could have been Serenity, a small child-colored figure nestled in the folds of the inky dark. My heart raced as I barely recognized Lily standing in the doorway, but something was off. She wore a clown mask that had mysteriously appeared from nowhere. "Lily, take off the mask," I shouted, but there was a sparkle in her eye I had never seen before. "You said I should help it," she whispered, her voice low, as if she were colluding with something unseen. The flashlight flickered just as I reached the door, and I felt a force pulling me back. I stumbled, falling onto the bathroom tiles as an unsettling laughter filled the room, so haunting, it stretched beyond any rational explanation. The air swirled around me, heavy with an unseen presence that surrounded me like an invisible storm. "Help me," the voice echoed, now layered inside Lily's words, the resonance shifting as if it had intertwined with her very being. She stepped forward, and my heart raced as I realized her grip on reality was slipping. "Lily, come back," I shouted, scrambling against the floor. Just as suddenly as the darkness had enveloped us, the bathroom lights burst back on, illuminating the room in an icy fluorescent glare. As the shadows shrank and scattered, I lunged forward, forcing her mask to the ground, but the child I once knew was gone, replaced by a hollow gaze devoid of innocence. "She wants to play," she repeated, her voice strangely melodic. Panic twisted my stomach into knots as I grabbed her arm, desperately shaking her back to reality. "This isn't a game. Come back." But she just laughed, that childlike giggle, echoing off the walls, a sound that now felt more sinister than innocent. Sorrow pierced through me as utter hopelessness surged. Before I could process it all, the house shifted, the walls creaked and groaned, closing in around us. I fumbled at the door, but it slammed shut in my face. Was this some punishment for indulging a child's whimsy? "Help me," she whispered again, her eyes flickering with a blend of fear and admiration. I felt like I was losing her, slippage of time churning darker. Just as I feared that this could all spiral into something irreversible, a sense of clarity surged through me. I had to act fast, whatever this was, I couldn't let it take her. "If you want to play," I shouted, pulling everything inside me, "then let her go. This is a game, remember? Let her win." The laughter faded for a moment, replaced with an eerie silence that hung in the air like a heavy fog. Lily blinked, momentarily shaken. "What?" I grabbed her shoulders, focusing every ounce of my will onto her. "You're stronger than this, Lily. Remember the experiments? Together we can control it." Her eyes flickered again, holding on to a glimmer of recognition. Just as the room shifted around us, shadows lurked menacingly, waiting for a response. The laughter resumed, but this time it felt fainter. "We can banish whatever this is," I yelled, picking up the mask and tossing it aside, the weight of darkness pressing down on us. "You have to fight. Fight back." For a heartbeat, the world around us stilled. Time twisted as if reality itself didn't know what to do next. Then, out of nowhere, a rush of cold air exploded through the space like a tsunami, and every door flung open. The laughter rose to a deafening crescendo, drowning me in vertigo. A shadow danced at the edge of my eyes, but in that heartbeat, I realized, laughter turned to screams. And in that blink, I found myself alone in the bathroom, a hollow void suddenly occupying the space where Lily once stood. My heart pounded violently in my chest, but I knew, somewhere deep down, that helping her was the only way to win this game. As the echoes of "help me" faded, forever lost in the chaotic whirlwind of uncertainty, I resolved to fight, to reclaim what had been taken. Because I refused to let this supernatural force steal her away without a struggle. Whatever had happened, whatever had taken over Lily, I was not finished. This was only the beginning, and by the end of this, I would make sure that child would learn something new, what it truly meant to fight back against the darkness.
I always thought my best friend, Leah, would stand by me in any situation, but when she called me the morning after my pregnancy announcement, her voice was a chilling blend of disbelief and pity that still haunts me. "Well, you won't be able to be my maid of honor now," she said, almost cheerfully, as if it were a congratulatory message instead of a stab to the gut. The reasoning behind her decision? I was too fat to stand up there alongside her on her big day, her words ringing in my ears like a twisted anthem, a melody of pain that echoed long after she hung up. I was still getting used to my body, both proud of the little life developing inside me and struggling with a sudden onslaught of judgment from people I considered close. Leah had often reminded me that she was all about aesthetics, that the wedding, an elaborate fairy tale she had meticulously planned for years, had to be perfectly polished in every way, and I felt my heart sink as I realized I was being cast aside like a mere accessory that no longer matched her vision. The audacity of her words burned hotter than any physical pain I felt, and despite the tears prickling at the corners of my eyes, I forced myself to respond with indifference. "I understand," I replied, but internally I was screaming. The more I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. Why was she prioritizing her wedding day above our lifelong friendship, and why was my body suddenly standing in the way of everything she claimed to cherish? The thought of watching her walk down the aisle, glimmering and perfect, while I sat bitterly amongst the guests, filled me with an unsettling dread, my heart pounding with the fear of being scrutinized, not just for my appearance but for my own choices. I was devastated, and as the days unfurled, Leah's excitement about planning her wedding became a callous reminder of what I had lost. I didn't just lose the title of maid of honor, I felt like I was losing a piece of myself, the part that believed in unconditional support and shared dreams. So when Leah texted me, a few days later with a joke-free request to reimburse her for the bridal party dress I had already purchased and the bridal shower preparations I had been involved in, my heart twisted. I thought I misread, I thought surely there was some mistake, but no, I could see the glaring digits of the total beside her dismissive message. It was as if she had stripped the vibrant colors from our years of laughter and stitched them into a practical ledger of costs. The sum of our friendship boiled down to money. And so, unable to hold back my anger any longer, I confronted her in one final storm of emotion, asserting how hurtful her decision had been, how it twisted our years of memories into regret and resentment. It wasn't just a petty betrayal, it was a visceral blow to the trust we built over countless late-night conversations and shared secrets. But Leah wouldn't hear it. She ended our conversation with an icy ultimatum, demanding I either pay up or get out of her life completely. In a fit of defiance and disbelief, I made the choice to decline the invitation, to cut ties with a version of Leah who I couldn't recognize anymore, but the aftermath of that decision seeped into every crevice of my life. I expected some peace in the decision, to cut away the toxicity, to heal, but the rage festering in her heart instead morphed her into a ghost that followed me everywhere, plastered on social media, with posts filled with photos of her radiant, dress-fitted body, mirroring the designer's privileged blessings with a beautiful smile. I was not only struck by the glaring absence of my once happy presence in those pictures but felt an unnerving sense of closure slipping away. It gnawed at me every single day, until even the worst days of morning sickness became piggyback rides on waves of guilt, a feeling so profound it settled into my bones. I wanted to shout that I was pregnant, that I had a life thriving inside me, filling me with purpose and dreams of a future while trying to drown out the cruel comments I'd heard echo around me. Yet, the primal instinct to protect my unborn child pushed those thoughts deeper. The more Leah posted, the more I found myself desperate to suss out the truth hidden beneath her perky facade. I began to suspect she had replaced me not just as the maid of honor, but as the centerpiece of her journey, with a sea of curated friendships blossoming around her, and I couldn't help but feel myself drowning in the loneliness of my apartment, fat and forgotten. This spiraled into late-night Reddit posts and search histories steeped in betrayal. I obsessively read about fake friends and cut manipulative people from your life. Then, one night, consumed by emotions I couldn't contain, I finally reached out on this subreddit, desperate for validation. Aita for refusing to be part of Leah's wedding after everything? My post gained traction over the following days as strangers flooded in, offering sympathy or delivering swift judgments. But one comment hit me like a hammer to glass: sometimes the ones closest to you turn out to be the wolf in sheep's clothing. She sounds toxic. It shook something inside me, awakening a sense of clarity I thought I had lost in those swirling tides of resentment. I had unwittingly wrestled with a version of myself that envisioned reconciliation and longing while battling the functional realization that this was more than friendship, it was survival. The world outside continued to swirl in a beautiful chaos, but I clung to that truth like it was a lifeline, finally setting fire to the remnants of what was once a beautiful friendship. When Leah's wedding day came, I made a different choice. I adorned my bulging belly with a dress that celebrated this new chapter of my life and took a hesitant step towards happiness not for her, but for me and my baby. I chose to embrace the change and finally break the chains wrapped around my heart. And in that moment, amidst the darkness, I discovered my power, ready to welcome the life I was about to create, free from the shadows of judgment and betrayal. Only this time, I wasn't so sure it would feel like a new beginning. It felt like an end, an echoing finale of self-love that pushed me toward living for the first time in months.
The sun had just begun its daily descent when I noticed my 8-year-old son, Jamie, standing frozen in front of his bedroom door, his small hands gripping the doorknob like it was a lifeline. Jamie was bright and imaginative, his mind usually bursting with stories about dragons and robots, but tonight was different. Tonight, he was terrified. "What is it, buddy?" I asked, kneeling so I could be eye to eye with him. He glanced at me, his eyes wide, reflecting both fear and a plea for help. "There's something in my room, Dad. I can't go in there," he whispered, his voice shaky. I felt my heart clench as the thoughts circled my mind. How had my brave little boy become so afraid? I opened the door to his room, the familiar creaks echoing in the hallway like whispers. A cascade of shadows danced against the walls, illuminated by the dim light from the hallway. "See? It's just your toys and your books," I reassured him, but I could see the tiny shiver that trailed down his spine. I took a deep breath, desperate to find the right way to ease his fears. "Let's have a talk," I said. "I used to be scared of things too. Want to hear a story?" Jamie nodded slowly, but his gaze remained glued to the dark corners of the room. So, I spun a tale from my childhood, a story about how I once thought there were monsters lurking under my bed. I told him about that fateful night when I was convinced something was watching me while I lay in bed, and how I bravely grabbed my flashlight and went to confront that unseen terror. "And what did I find?" I asked, trailing off to build suspense. "What?" he whispered, his fear momentarily sidelined by curiosity. "A bunch of dust bunnies, and my old toys that I'd forgotten about." Sometimes, the things we fear are just things we don't understand. Jamie seemed to think about that, uncertainty flickering behind his eyes. "But what if there really is something in the dark?" he pressed, and I could see the shadow of doubt creeping back into his mind. At that moment, something clicked inside me. It wasn't just about the monsters, it was a chance to show him that fear was something we could face together. I decided right then that this was the night we would vanquish these shadows. "I have an idea," I said, a spark igniting. "What if we made a monster hunting toolkit?" His eyes widened with excitement laced with skepticism. "A what?" "A toolkit. We'll grab a flashlight, a pillowcase, and some monster spray, just a water bottle with a fancy label. We can even make some monster traps with your old Lego bricks." The corners of his mouth twitched into a smile, slowly replacing the fear. With enthusiasm bubbling, Jamie and I gathered our supplies, his small hands fumbling with tape and markers as he designed the labels. The tension that had gripped him eased with every piece of gear we assembled. Finally, we stood before the darkened doorway, fully equipped to conquer the imagination's worst foes. "On 3, I said, my heart racing, alongside his. 1, 2, 3. With that, we leapt into the room like warriors entering an arena. Jamie's grip on the flashlight wavered, but he steadied himself, directed the beam into the corners that had held him captive. "Monster spray," he shouted, unleashing a spray of water into the dark, dissolving the eerie shadows as we moved deeper into the room. The more we searched, the more emboldened Jamie became, his laughter breaking through the tension. By the time we reached the bed, he was bouncing with newfound bravado. "Is it under here?" I asked playfully, bending down to peer beneath. And that's when I noticed something, a small, fabric-covered book peeking out from the side. It was a journal I had forgotten about, filled with my childhood drawings and stories of my own fears. "Look what I found," I exclaimed, pulling it out. Jamie's eyes lit up, and as I began to read aloud from my sketches, fear transformed into curiosity, and curiosity ignited a powerful flame of understanding. I could feel his anxiety dissipating. By the time we finished the journal, everything seemed different. The room that had once felt ominous was now a realm of imagination and laughter. Jamie looked up at me, eyes shining. "Thanks, Dad," he said, beaming with a happiness I hadn't seen in hours. "Can we do this every night?" The request struck me in that moment, a proud parent moment. We had battled fears together, and in doing so, I realized I wasn't just helping him face his monsters. I was also confronting my own lingering shadows of apprehension as a parent. As I tucked him in, I felt buoyed by a profound connection. "Of course we can," I whispered. "But remember, it's not just the scary things we face that matter, it's the courage we find when we face them." My heart swelled with pride as he drifted off to sleep, the night now peaceful instead of menacing. In that brief exchange, I understood that fears, whether rational or not, are a part of growing up. We all have our monsters to face, and sometimes all it takes is a flash of light, a sprinkle of laughter, and a reminder that we're not alone in the dark. Entitled Mom Demands I Give Her My Wedding Dress, Sparks Fly. It all started with my wedding dress. It was a beautiful, flowing gown that I had dreamed of since I was a little girl, and now it was finally mine, hanging in my closet, ready for the big day. My fiancé, Jake, and I were set to get married in just a few weeks, and I was both excited and nervous. We had planned a small, intimate ceremony with close family and friends, a reflection of our personalities. However, the tranquility of my wedding preparations was shattered the day my future mother-in-law, Linda, invited me over for coffee. I walked into her house, full of excitement and trepidation, and found her sitting at the kitchen table with a big smile on her face. "I'm so glad you could come, sweetie," she exclaimed, her voice cheerful. We chatted about wedding plans and decorations, but then she dropped a bombshell. "You know, I've been thinking about my daughter-in-law's dress," she began, her tone suddenly shifting. "I'm sure you know how important it is for her to look stunning on her special day, too." I nodded, confused. Linda had a daughter, Emily, who was getting married the following year. I had assumed she wanted to help me with ideas or plans for her wedding, but I had no idea where this was going. I've been looking at some dresses for her, but nothing seems to compare to yours, she continued, her eyes gleaming with an idea. I was wondering if you would consider letting Emily borrow your dress for her wedding. I stared at her, shocked. I'm sorry, but this dress means a lot to me. I've been dreaming about it for years, and it's custom made for my body. I can't just let someone else wear it. Linda's smile faltered, and her expression morphed into something more demanding. But it would mean so much to her. She deserves to have the perfect dress just like you do. And let's be honest, it's not like you'll need it after your wedding, right? My heart raced. I mean, yes, I won't wear it again, but that doesn't mean I want to hand it over to someone else. It's special to me. Linda leaned closer, lowering her voice as if we were sharing a secret. You don't understand how much this means to our family. This is about keeping traditions alive, and wearing family dresses is part of that. I thought you'd be more understanding. My stomach churned at the thought of being coerced into giving away something so precious. I get that traditions are important, but I still want to keep my dress. This is my wedding, and I deserve to have my moment. Linda's demeanor shifted, and I could see anger flicker behind her eyes. How selfish of you. You're thinking only about yourself. Don't you want to make Emily happy? She looks up to you, you know. I felt my cheeks burn with frustration. I'm sorry, but this isn't about being selfish. I just can't give my wedding dress to someone else. That's not how this works. Linda huffed, crossing her arms. I guess you don't care about family, then. You're just thinking about your own desires. I thought you were better than this. I was taken aback by her words. My heart raced as I stood my ground. I care about my family, but I also care about my feelings and my wedding. This dress is a huge part of my day. She rolled her eyes, clearly unwilling to listen to my perspective. You'll regret this decision. Emily deserves the best, and it's not like you have a personal attachment to the dress. You won't wear it again, so what's the big deal? My anger flared. That's not the point. I won't wear it again, but that doesn't mean I should just give it away. It's mine. Linda's eyes narrowed as if she was calculating her next move. If you won't let her wear it, I'll just have to make a point to tell Jake how unsupportive you're being. Maybe he'll change his mind about marrying you. The words hung in the air, and I felt a wave of fury wash over me. You wouldn't dare, I exclaimed, shocked that she would stoop so low. This isn't about Jake. It's about my dress and my wedding. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. If you want to play these games, go ahead. I'll tell him exactly what you've been saying about this dress. Linda's expression hardened. Go ahead. But don't be surprised when you lose him. Family is everything, and you clearly don't understand that. I turned on my heel and stormed out of her house, my mind racing with a mix of anger and disbelief. I couldn't believe she had the audacity to demand my wedding dress, to turn it into a family obligation. I drove home in a daze, wondering if I had crossed a line by standing up for myself. When I got home, I found Jake lounging on the couch, completely oblivious to the turmoil I had just experienced. I flopped down next to him, my heart still racing. Hey, how was your day? He asked casually. You wouldn't believe what just happened, I said, my voice shaking with frustration. I recounted the whole story about Linda and her outrageous request, and to my surprise, Jake's expression shifted from casual to serious. That's ridiculous. Your dress is yours, and no one should demand it from you, especially not my mom. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as he spoke. I know. It feels like she's trying to manipulate me into giving it up. Jake frowned, his brow furrowing. You should talk to her. Set some boundaries. She shouldn't be threatening you like that. I nodded, knowing he was right. But part of me was terrified of what would happen next. I took a deep breath and resolved to confront Linda again, this time with Jake by my side. A few days later, we decided to invite her over for dinner. I was a bundle of nerves, pacing around the kitchen as I prepared the meal. When she arrived, the tension in the air was palpable. Hi, Linda, I greeted her, forcing a smile. Thanks for coming over. She entered with an air of confidence, a smile plastered on her face, as if everything was normal. Of course. I hope you've changed your mind about the dress, she said sweetly. I just know how much Emily would love it. Jake shot me a look of support as we sat down to dinner. I took a deep breath, ready to address the elephant in the room. Actually, Linda, we need to talk about the dress again, I said firmly. Her smile faltered, and I could see the tension in her shoulders. Oh. I thought we were past that. We're not, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I feel like you've crossed a line by demanding my wedding dress and trying to manipulate me into giving it up. Linda's expression hardened, and I could feel the atmosphere in the room shift. Manipulate you? I was only trying to help my daughter. It's a family tradition. A tradition shouldn't come at the cost of someone else's happiness. This is my wedding dress, and I won't be giving it away. I love it, and it means a lot to me. Jake chimed in, his voice strong. Mom, this is about respect. You can't just demand things from her because you think it's for the family. Linda's face flushed with anger, and I could see the frustration boiling over. You both are being unreasonable. It's just a dress. I felt a spark of anger rise in me. It's not just a dress. It's a symbol of my love for Jake and the commitment we're making. It's about my moment, my experience. Linda's voice rose, and I could feel the tension escalating. You're being selfish. You're ruining our family's tradition. I could see the sparks flying between us, and the room felt charged with emotions. No, you're ruining our relationship with your entitled demands. I shot back, my heart pounding in my chest. This isn't just about Emily, it's about you trying to control everything. Linda glared at me, her eyes filled with fury. If you don't care about family, then maybe you shouldn't be marrying my son. I felt my heart drop at her words. You don't get to decide who Jake marries. He chose me. The tension reached a boiling point, and I could feel the air crackling around us. This conversation is over, Linda shouted, standing up abruptly. I won't be a part of this nonsense. With that, she stormed out of our house, leaving Jake and me in stunned silence. I felt a mix of anger and relief wash over me as I processed what had just happened. Are you okay? Jake asked, his eyes searching mine. I nodded, feeling empowered. I am. I stood my ground, and I won't let her control me. Jake wrapped his arms around me, and I felt a sense of calm settle in. I'm proud of you for speaking up, he said softly. You deserve to have your day and your dress. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, Linda didn't reach out, and I wasn't surprised. I knew I had made my stand, and I felt good about it. The wedding day arrived, and as I slipped into my dress, I couldn't help but feel beautiful and I never considered myself an artist. In fact, I struggled to find a passion at all. I floated through life, job to job, feeling like a ghost among the living, unseen and unheard. That was until the night I stumbled upon a crumbling old art studio hidden away in the backstreets of my town. It was an unassuming building, the kind that blended into the background, gray and dusty. I almost walked past it, but something, maybe it was the flickering light spilling out of the window, or the faint sound of laughter, or a feeling that I didn't know how to articulate, pulled me inside. As soon as I stepped in, my senses were bombarded by the comforting scent of oil paints and turpentine. The walls were lined with half-finished canvases, each a burst of color, emotion, and possibility. The old wooden floor creaked beneath my feet, echoing the laughter of a group of people scattered around the room. They looked so alive, engrossed in their conversations and creations, celebrating each other's progress and sharing inspiration. I felt out of place, but the curiosity tugged at me harder than the discomfort. That's when I met her, Vivian. She was an older woman with wild gray hair that looked like it had never known a brush, and her hands were speckled with paint of every hue. She approached me with a smile that radiated warmth. You look lost, dear. What brings you to our little sanctuary? I fumbled with my words, but eventually managed to explain that I was just passing through when something pulled me in. Her eyes twinkled with understanding. Sometimes, the universe has a way of leading us to where we need to be. Why don't you join us? We're just about to start a new project. Hesitation coursed through me. Here was a group of passionate artists, and I had barely drawn stick figures in years. But before I could decline, she took my hand and led me to a blank canvas looming in the corner. What do you want to create? I was speechless. My brain was filled with thoughts of my lack of ability, but as I stared at the canvas, something shifted within me. I felt a flicker of something resembling hope. I want to express how I feel. The room quieted, the laughter subsided, and all eyes were on me. In that moment of vulnerability, I realized what I wanted wasn't just to paint, it was to share a part of myself, something I had long silenced. I picked up a brush, trembling yet determined, and allowed myself to be swept up in the moment. With each stroke, colors blended together, and for the first time, I felt as if I was channeling something greater, something that had been trapped inside me for too long. Hours slipped away unnoticed as I poured every ounce of emotion into that canvas, and when I finally stepped back to look at my work, I gasped. It was chaotic yet beautiful, an explosion of colors that mirrored the tumult of my mind and heart. The group erupted into applause, and I felt a warmth bloom within me that I had long thought lost. That night transformed me. I didn't just discover a skill, I uncovered a passion, a voice, and a way to navigate the world that made sense to me. I began spending more time at that studio, learning from Vivian and the other artists, allowing their passion to fuel my own. We created projects that split open our hearts and merged them with vibrant paints. I found myself staying late into the night, mesmerized by the process and the support of a community that celebrated individuality. But as the weeks passed, the camaraderie turned into something darker. A lingering unease crept into the studio. It started with whispers about the origins of the old building. People said it was haunted by a painter who had once poured his soul into the walls, and after years of creation, he faded into the shadows, consumed by his own madness. I brushed those rumors off. After all, art was about tapping into emotions, wasn't it? Then late one evening, as we painted under the dim light of flickering bulbs, I noticed a strange feeling that settled over me like a fog. It was as if the air thickened, and the shadows around us grew long and eerie. I shook it off until I found myself alone in the studio one night, my friends having left hours earlier. The studio was silent, save for the rustling of old canvases and the presence of something unseen pressing against me. I felt it in my bones, a cold dread that invaded my thoughts. As I picked up my brush and forced myself to paint, I looked around, half expecting to see someone watching me. That's when a low whisper drifted through the air, echoing off the walls. Create. More. I dropped my brush, heart racing, the sound resonating in my ears. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then I heard it again, clearer this time: create. Or suffer. Panic set in as I backed away from the canvas. I stumbled and knocked over a jar of paint, splattering the floor with vibrant blue, my brave explosion muted by a wave of terror. I hurried out, slamming the door behind me, questioning everything I'd ever felt about that studio. I didn't discourage myself from returning, though. The passion had ignited a flame within me, and I was drawn back in like a moth to a flickering flame. But the atmosphere was shifting. Each time I entered, the whispers would grow louder, wrapping their tendrils around my psyche. The urge to paint became not just a desire but a compulsion. My friends began to change too, their eyes grew glossed over with obsession, as if the paint had invaded their souls. One evening, I found Vivian staring at a piece she had created, a grotesque swirl of colors that twisted in surreal ways. "It tells a story," she murmured, though her voice lacked its usual spark. But the painting didn't look like art, it looked like madness. I tried to distance myself, but I was ensnared by the same force that had drawn me there in the first place. One night, I hovered over a canvas, my spirit torn between joy and dread. I felt something watching me, and the room shifted subtly, shadows creeping and coiling. Create. Or else. The whispers had become demands. I heard my friends murmuring incoherently in the corners, eyes crazed with urgency. The colors blurred together, my brush moved without command, and I painted past the point of no return, the edges of my sanity frayed as an unholy masterpiece took shape beneath my hands. The clock struck midnight, the stroke of the hour reverberating through my bones, and I realized I was trapped. The air thickened like syrup, and from the depths of my own creation, the whispers morphed into a resonant voice that filled the studio. Keep painting, or it will consume everything you love. With each stroke, I felt pieces of myself tearing away, dissolving into the very canvas I was creating. My heart raced as the terrible reality dawned on me: I had traded my soul for passion. I dropped the brush, the studio falling silent, and the shadows recoiled as if they'd been struck. My friends froze, their eyes wide with bewilderment, as if they too had just awoken from a trance. I stared at the canvas, and terror washed over me as I realized what I had painted, an image that mirrored the studio itself, distorted and menacing, lurking just beneath the surface. In that moment, clarity pierced through the chaos. The art was consuming us, channeling every raw emotion and dark thought into a space that had once breathed life into us. I bolted for the exit, shoving through the group and gasping for breath. Behind me, the canvas erupted into a chaotic storm of color, a whirlwind that pulled everything into its depths. I glanced back one last time as I fled, and my heart shattered. Those I had grown close to were swallowed whole by their own creations, faces twisted with fear and ecstasy as they became part of the very art they lived for. I stumbled out into the night, the cool air hitting my face like a slap. I had escaped, but I knew the whispers would follow me. It's been weeks since that terrible night, but even now, they echo in my mind, haunting reminders of creativity turned malevolent, passion transformed into a curse. I scoured the town for anything about the studio. The stories were gone, but the fear lingered. I can't shake the thought that the universe drew me there for a reason, and now I'm left questioning my own reality. I wonder if the studio is still there, still waiting to lure in unsuspecting souls looking for creativity. If you ever find a quaint old art studio hidden in a back alley, I urge you to turn around and walk away. Trust me, your passion isn't worth the price you might pay. How a misunderstanding led to a major life change. How a misunderstanding led to a major life change. It all started with one small, innocent mistake, the kind you laugh about later, or at least, that's what I thought. It was late on a Thursday night, and I was exhausted, mindlessly scrolling through my emails when I saw one with an unfamiliar sender name. It looked important, something from a job recruiter I'd spoken to months ago but had never heard back from. The subject line read, "Urgent, last chance for your offer." My heart skipped a beat. My current job was okay, but I'd always dreamed of moving on to something bigger, more challenging. I'd almost forgotten about applying for this job. The waiting period had stretched on so long that I'd just assumed they'd gone with someone else. But here it was, a second chance, seemingly dropped into my lap at the exact moment I was feeling stuck. I opened the email and, without even taking a breath, scanned through it. It congratulated me on my supposed acceptance into the position, though it did mention that I had to respond by the end of the week to confirm my interest. It was already Thursday night. I panicked, glancing at the clock, realizing I barely had any time left. I shot off a quick response, heart pounding, trying to sound professional despite my excitement, and hit send. My thoughts immediately filled with plans for what was next, leaving my current job, packing up, moving to a new city. It was impulsive, yes, but something inside me told me this was right. The opportunity was too perfect to pass up. The next morning, I got a reply from the recruiter. Her tone was warm but slightly confused. She thanked me for my interest, but then mentioned something strange. "Just to confirm, you're interested in continuing your work as a crisis counselor in the rehabilitation program, correct?" My blood ran cold. Crisis counselor. Rehabilitation program? I'd applied for a marketing position. Something about this didn't add up. Frantically, I went back to reread the email chain, realizing in horror that I'd misunderstood the offer entirely. This wasn't a corporate job, it was an opening at a rural rehabilitation center, the kind of place I'd never even considered working. My stomach dropped, panic rising as I considered my options. I'd already quit my job, and if I backed out now, I'd have nothing. Yet the thought of working in a field I knew nothing about, helping people in situations I wasn't trained for, terrified me. But something inside me whispered that maybe this was meant to happen, a twist of fate urging me to take a path I'd never dared to explore. Feeling trapped, I decided to at least visit the center, thinking that maybe I could explain the situation and back out gracefully. I made the drive out to the location they'd listed, miles away from the bustling city I knew, deep into the woods, where the landscape turned quieter, more isolated. When I arrived, I was greeted by a kind older woman, named Ellen, who mistook my hesitant expression for first-day nerves and gave me a reassuring pat on the back. There was something so comforting about her presence, something that made it hard to tell her the truth. She led me inside, introducing me to the staff, all of whom greeted me warmly. They seemed so genuine, so eager to welcome someone they believed was here to make a difference. I felt a pang of guilt, realizing that these people were counting on me, seeing something in me that I didn't even see in myself. Before I knew it, they'd handed me a uniform, set me up in a small on-site cabin, and I found myself unpacking, too embarrassed to back out. That first night, I lay awake, questioning my sanity, feeling overwhelmed and out of place, wondering how I'd ended up here. But the next morning, as I walked into the common room, the residents greeted me with cautious but hopeful smiles. I could see the weight of their struggles, the silent battles they fought, and it shook something deep within me. I knew I didn't belong here, didn't have the skills they needed, but I stayed, partly because I didn't know how to leave and partly because something about it felt strangely right. Day by day, I got to know the residents, listened to their stories, their regrets, their hopes, and the hard-won victories that others rarely saw. I didn't have much to offer, but I found myself learning more about compassion, patience, and resilience than I'd ever learned in an office cubicle. I had been so wrapped up in the corporate ladder, in the pursuit of success, that I'd never stopped to understand what real hardship looked like, or what it felt like to help people through their darkest moments. Weeks turned into months, and I began to feel a sense of purpose, a fulfillment I'd never known before. It wasn't easy. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel out of my depth, didn't make mistakes. But the staff, the residents, they didn't hold it against me. They showed me kindness, understanding, and I learned from them, grew because of them. I come here because of a misunderstanding, an accident, yet now I couldn't imagine leaving. One night, I sat outside, watching the stars with a resident who had been through more pain than I could ever imagine. She looked at me, her face soft in the moonlight, and said, "I don't know how you ended up here, but you've helped me more than you know." Sometimes, life puts us exactly where we need to be, even if we don't see it at first. Her words struck me, and I realized she was right. Maybe I'd come here by mistake, but this place, these people, had given me a sense of purpose, a new understanding of what it meant to live a meaningful life. By the time I finally left that center, a year later, I was a different person. I didn't go back to the corporate world, didn't return to the life I'd once planned. Instead, I found myself drawn to nonprofit work, counseling, roles that allowed me to continue making a difference, however small. It was the biggest change I'd ever made, a shift I'd never expected. All because of a misunderstanding, a single email that led me down a path I'd never have chosen on my own. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, I think back to that night, to the fear and uncertainty, and I realize how grateful I am for that mistake, for the chance to find a new purpose in the most unlikely of places.